Your performance makes me look incompetent. My name's Demian. I'm 37 years old, and I had just closed the biggest deal of my career at Morrison Financial Services when my manager Bradley Fletcher called me into his office. The commission alone would have paid my mortgage for 6 months. Instead, I sat across from him watching his jaw clench as he stared at my quarterly numbers. 300% above target, he said, tapping his pen against the desk. Every quarter. For 2 years straight. I waited. Bradley had this way of building up to something, like a storm gathering before it hit. The pen tapping got faster. I need employees who know their place, not show-offs, he continued, his voice taking on that edge I'd been hearing more often lately. This isn't about individual glory, Demian. It's about team cohesion. The irony wasn't lost on me. My sales had kept our department profitable while half the team struggled to hit minimum targets. Maria Santos, our senior saleswoman, had pulled me aside last week to mention how Bradley had been taking credit for my client relationships in his reports to upper management. I'd brushed it off. Figured it was just office politics. I'm recommending your termination, Bradley said flatly. The words hung in the air between us. Outside his office, I could see the rest of the team at their desks, completely unaware that their top performer was getting fired for being too good at his job. Jessica Torres was on a call with a prospect I'd referred to her. Nathan Brooks was reviewing a presentation I'd helped him prepare. They had no idea what was coming. Thank you for the feedback, I said. Bradley blinked. He'd expected me to argue, maybe beg for my job. Instead, I stood up and straightened my tie. Human resources will handle the paperwork, he said, recovering. Security will escort you out within the hour. I nodded and walked toward the door. As I reached for the handle, Bradley cleared his throat. Nothing personal, you understand, just business. I turned back to look at him. He was already pulling out his phone, probably calling human resources to start the process. His hands shook slightly as he dialed. For the first time, I noticed the stress lines around his eyes, the way his shirt was wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Of course, I said. Just business. But as I walked back to my desk to pack my things, I caught Maria's eye. She was watching through Bradley's glass office, her expression dark with understanding. Nathan looked up from his computer, confused by the security guard who had appeared beside my cubicle. Something told me this was just the beginning. I'd been with Morrison Financial Services for 4 years. Started as a junior associate, worked my way up through pure performance. No connections, no family money, just results. My father had been a mechanic who taught me that quality work speaks for itself. My mother had been a school teacher who showed me that helping others succeed made everyone stronger. Bradley had hired me personally back then. Different man. Hungry, ambitious, talking about building the best sales team in Denver. He'd seemed impressed by my track record at my previous firm. The way I'd turned around underperforming accounts through relationship building rather than high-pressure tactics. The first year went smoothly. Bradley celebrated my wins, used my techniques in team training sessions. I brought in Maria Santos from a competitor, and she became our second highest performer. Jessica Torres was a recent college graduate I'd mentored, and Nathan Brooks had been struggling until I showed him how to research clients properly. But something shifted when I started consistently outperforming everyone, including Bradley's own historical numbers. The congratulations became shorter. The team meetings started focusing on balance and supporting your colleagues instead of celebrating individual achievement. 6 months ago, I'd overheard Bradley on a call with CEO Victoria Hayes. He was presenting our quarterly results, taking credit for the strategies I'd developed, the client relationships I'd built. When Victoria asked about our top performer, Bradley had said, "It's really been a team effort. I've been working closely with all our high achievers." I'd walked away from that conversation feeling something cold settle in my stomach. Then there were the smaller signs. Bradley started scheduling client meetings without inviting me, even for accounts I'd developed. He'd reassign my prospects to other team members, claiming it was for their professional development. When Victoria visited our floor last month, Bradley made sure I was out on client calls. Maria had tried to warn me. "He's threatened by you." she'd said over coffee. I've seen this before. Insecure managers can't handle being outshined. I'd defended him. Bradley was just under pressure from upper management. The financial services industry was competitive. He had his own targets to hit. But standing at my desk now, watching security wait patiently while I packed my personal items, I realized Maria had been right. The team was gathering around asking questions. Jessica looked like she might cry. Nathan was already pulling out his phone, probably texting his wife about the sudden uncertainty. "What happened?" Maria asked quietly. "Performance issues," I said, loud enough for Bradley to hear through his office door. The look that passed between Maria and me said everything. We both knew what kind of performance issues I had. I was too good at my job, and that made Bradley look bad. The walk to my car felt longer than usual. Security had been professional but firm, and I could feel the entire office watching as I carried my box of personal items through the lobby. 4 years of building relationships, developing systems, mentoring teammates, and it ended with a cardboard box and a conversation about knowing my place. I sat in my truck for an hour after everyone else had gone home. The parking garage was empty except for a few late-working managers. Bradley's BMW was still there, probably staying late to brief Victoria Hayes on the personnel change he'd made. My phone buzzed with text messages. Maria wanted to know what really happened. Jessica was asking if I was okay. Nathan sent a simple message. "This is bullshit." I thought about calling my wife Lauren to tell her I'd been fired, but I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. She'd want to know why, and I wasn't sure I had a good answer. How do you explain that you lost your job for being too successful? Instead, I drove home through the Denver traffic, thinking about everything I'd built at Morrison Financial. The client base I'd developed from scratch, the mentoring system I'd created for new hires, the referral network that had brought in over $3 million in revenue just this year. Bradley didn't understand that those relationships weren't just about me. When clients worked with Morrison Financial, they were working with the entire team. I'd made sure of that. Cross-trained everyone, shared my contact lists, brought teammates into meetings so clients would have multiple touch points. But sitting in my driveway, staring at my house, I realized something that made my chest tighten with anger. Bradley hadn't just fired me to protect his ego. He damaged everything I'd worked to build. Those client relationships, the team dynamics, the systems that made everyone more successful. My phone rang. Maria's name appeared on the screen. "Emergency team meeting tomorrow morning," she said without preamble. "Before Bradley gets in, we need to talk." "Maria, I don't work there anymore." "No," she said, "but we do. And if they can fire you for doing excellent work, what does that say about the rest of us?" After she hung up, I sat in my truck until the streetlights came on. A plan was forming in my mind, not for revenge, but for something better. Bradley wanted employees who knew their place. He was about to find out exactly what place we all occupied in the success of Morrison Financial Services. I pulled out my laptop and started making a list. Every major client I'd brought in, every deal I'd closed, every relationship I'd built over 4 years. By morning, I'd know exactly what I was worth to the company. More importantly, I'd know what my absence would cost them. Maria's emergency meeting started at 7:30 the next morning in the conference room furthest from Bradley's office. Jessica, Nathan, and 3 other team members sat around the table with coffee and grim expressions. Word had spread quickly through the office about my termination. "They fired the best salesperson in the company," Maria said without preamble. "Yesterday, Demian closed the Henderson account. Single largest deal in our department's history. Today he's gone." Nathan shook his head. "It doesn't make sense. His numbers are incredible." "It makes perfect sense," said David Kim, one of our senior associates. "Bradley's been taking credit for Demian's work for months. Having him around made it obvious who was really driving our success." Jessica looked up from her coffee. "What do you mean taking credit?" Maria pulled out a folder. "I've been keeping track. Remember the Rodriguez portfolio that brought in $800,000 last quarter? Bradley presented it to management as his strategic win. The Morrison Webb merger consultation? Same thing." The room went quiet. I'd developed both of those accounts from cold prospects, spent months building relationships, designing custom financial strategies. Bradley had barely been involved beyond signing off on my proposals. "How do you know all this?" Nathan asked. "Because I've been documenting everything," Maria said. "My previous firm went through something similar. Management started taking credit for our work, then firing anyone who threatened their narrative. I learned to keep records." She spread out printed emails, meeting notes, client correspondence. A paper trail showing exactly who had done what work over the past 2 years. My name appeared consistently as the primary contact, strategist, and relationship manager for our biggest accounts. "This is fraud," David said, scanning the documents. "It's worse than that," Maria replied. "Look at this email from last week." She pointed to a message from Bradley to Victoria Hayes, discussing the quarterly review process. In it, he described me as difficult to manage and not a team player, while simultaneously taking credit for 3 major deals I'd closed single-handedly. "He's been setting Demian up for months," Jessica said, her voice rising, "making him look bad while stealing his accomplishments." Nathan stood up and started pacing. "So what do we do? File a complaint with Human Resources?" Maria laughed bitterly. "Human Resources works for management. Bradley's already spun this as a performance issue. They'll back him up." "Then we go to Victoria Hayes directly," David suggested. "With what?" Maria asked. "Bradley's her direct report. She's going to trust his version of events over ours. Besides, think about it from her perspective. Why would she admit that her sales manager has been lying about his performance for 2 years? The meeting was running long. People started checking their phones, worried about Bradley arriving and finding us all together. But something had shifted in the room. The reality of our situation was sinking in. "Here's what I don't understand," Jessica said quietly. "If Bradley was willing to fire Demian for being too successful, what does that mean for the rest of us?" The question hung in the air. We all knew the answer, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. "It means none of us are safe," Nathan finally said. "If we excel, we're a threat. If we underperform, we're dead weight. Either way, Bradley controls our careers." Maria closed the folder and looked around the table. "Or we control our own." "What are you suggesting?" David asked. "I'm suggesting that maybe Morrison Financial Services needs to understand exactly what they lost when they fired Demian, and maybe we need to understand what we're worth in a job market that actually values competence." Bradley's BMW pulled into the parking lot outside the conference room window. The meeting broke up quickly, everyone returning to their desks with forced normalcy. But something had changed. We'd all seen the documentation, understood the scope of Bradley's deception. More importantly, we'd all realized that our own success made us targets in Bradley's insecure management style. That afternoon, I got a call from Jennifer Walsh, one of my biggest clients. Henderson Industries had been working with Morrison Financial for 3 years, entirely through my relationship with Jennifer. "Demian, I just heard some disturbing news," she said. "Bradley Fletcher called this morning to introduce himself as my new primary contact. He mentioned you were no longer with the company." "That's correct," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Can you tell me what happened? Because frankly, I'm concerned about continuing our relationship with Morrison if you're not there." Henderson Industries represented nearly $400,000 in annual revenue. More importantly, Jennifer had referred 2 other major clients to us over the past year. If she pulled her business, the domino effect would be significant. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details," I said, "but I'm confident that Morrison Financial will continue to provide excellent service." There was a pause. "Demian, you've been handling our portfolio for 3 years. You know our business, our goals, our risk tolerance. Bradley Fletcher spent 10 minutes on the phone trying to convince me he'd been involved in our account from the beginning. That's simply not true." After Jennifer hung up, my phone rang again. Then again. 5 of my major clients had received similar calls from Bradley, and all of them were reaching out to me directly. Word was spreading quickly through the business community that something had happened at Morrison Financial. By evening, I had a clearer picture of Bradley's strategy. He was trying to take over my client relationships by presenting himself as the architect of their success. But these were sophisticated business people who knew exactly who they'd been working with. Maria called around 8 p.m. "You need to see something," she said. "Can you meet me at that coffee shop on 17th Street? When I arrived, Maria had her laptop open and a grim expression on her face. "I did some digging after our meeting this morning," she said. "Pulled performance reports going back 2 years, cross-referenced them with actual deal documentation." She turned the screen toward me. It was a spreadsheet showing attributed sales versus actual sales for every team member, including Bradley. "Look at Bradley's numbers," she said, pointing to a column highlighted in red. According to his self-reported performance metrics, Bradley had been directly responsible for over 60% of our department's revenue over the past 2 years. But when Maria cross-referenced those claims with client records, email trails, and meeting notes, a different picture emerged. "He's been systematically taking credit for everyone's work," she said. "Not just yours. Mine, Jessica's, Nathan's. Anyone who had a successful quarter suddenly found their biggest deals attributed to strategic oversight from Bradley." The scope was staggering. Bradley hadn't just stolen credit for my work. He'd been inflating his own performance metrics by claiming partial or full credit for nearly every significant deal closed by our team. "This goes all the way up to Victoria Hayes," Maria continued. "She's been promoting Bradley and increasing his bonus structure based on these false performance reports." "How did he think he'd get away with this?" I asked. "Because it worked," Maria said. "Until you started consistently outperforming him by such large margins that the math stopped adding up. If you were just one member of his team, how were you personally responsible for such a huge percentage of revenue?" My firing wasn't about my performance threatening Bradley's ego. It was about my success exposing his fraud. By removing me from the equation, he could continue claiming credit for the systems I'd built, the relationships I'd developed. "What are you going to do with this information?" I asked. Maria closed the laptop and looked directly at me. "We're going to make sure Victoria Hayes understands exactly what she lost when Bradley fired you. And we're going to make sure Bradley faces the consequences of what he's done." The next morning, half the sales team submitted resignation letters simultaneously. I wasn't there to see it happen, but Maria called me at 9:15 a.m. with barely contained satisfaction in her voice. "You should see Bradley's face right now," she said. "He just walked into the office and found resignation letters on his desk from Jessica, Nathan, David, and 3 others. They're all dated today, effective immediately." "What about you?" I asked. "I'm staying long enough to have a conversation with Victoria Hayes. Someone needs to present the documentation." According to Maria, the letters were simple and professional. Each team member cited a loss of confidence in departmental leadership and concerns about career development under current management. Nobody mentioned my firing directly, but the timing made the message clear. Bradley had stormed into the main office demanding to know if this was some kind of coordinated attack. Jessica had looked up from packing her desk and said, "We're just individual employees making individual career decisions." "He's calling it sabotage," Maria told me, running around the office trying to figure out who orchestrated what he's calling a conspiracy. By 10 a.m., Victoria Hayes was in the building. The CEO rarely visited our floor, but losing half a sales team in one morning tends to get executive attention. Maria watched through the conference room glass as Bradley tried to explain the situation. "He's sweating through his shirt," Maria reported. "Victoria looks like she wants to strangle him." My phone started ringing with calls from former teammates. The ones who had resigned were already fielding offers from competing firms. Word had spread quickly through Denver's financial services community that Morrison Financial's top performers were suddenly available. Nathan texted me. 3 interviews lined up already. Turns out we're more valuable than Bradley wanted us to believe. Jessica called around lunchtime. "I feel like I should thank you," she said. "If they hadn't fired you, I never would have realized how much I was worth." But the real impact was hitting Morrison Financial, where it mattered most. Jennifer Walsh from Henderson Industries had officially terminated their contract by noon. 2 other major clients followed within hours. The referral network I'd built over 4 years was dissolving as clients learned their primary contact was no longer with the company. Maria's meeting with Victoria Hayes was scheduled for 2 p.m. She'd prepared a comprehensive presentation showing the discrepancy between Bradley's reported performance and actual deal attribution. Client testimonials, email trails, documentation of systematic credit theft. "I'm not trying to get my job back," Maria told me before going into the meeting. "I'm trying to make sure this doesn't happen to other people." At 3:30, Maria called with an update. "Victoria's bringing in an external auditor to review all performance reports for the past 2 years," she said. "Bradley's been suspended pending investigation." "How did he react?" "Badly. Started yelling about employee loyalty, how this was all orchestrated by you somehow. Victoria told him to clean out his office." By the end of the day, Morrison Financial Services had lost over $3 million in client relationships, half their sales team, and their department manager. The ripple effects were just beginning. Other departments were asking questions about management practices. Human Resources was scrambling to understand how they'd missed such a massive fraud. "There's one more thing," Maria said during our final conversation of the day. "Victoria wants to meet with you tomorrow. She's asking if you'd consider coming back to rebuild the department." I looked out my home office window at the Denver skyline, thinking about everything that had happened over the past 3 days. "Tell her I'll consider it," I said. "But I have some conditions." Victoria Hayes called me directly the next morning. "Demian, I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. "I've spent the last 24 hours reviewing what actually happened in your department, and I'm appalled." The external audit had revealed the full scope of Bradley's deception, systematic credit theft, falsified performance reports, client relationship misrepresentation. The documentation Maria had compiled was just the beginning. "Bradley Fletcher has been terminated for cause," Victoria continued. "He's also facing potential criminal charges for fraud. I need you to understand that his actions were completely unauthorized and contrary to company values." "I appreciate that," I said. "I'd like to offer you the position of sales director, effective immediately. Full authority to rebuild the department, hire your own team, establish your own systems, plus a 40% salary increase and equity participation." It was a generous offer, more than generous. But I'd spent the past 3 days learning something important about my own value. "Thank you, Victoria. But I've decided to accept a partnership offer with Brightmarsh Consulting. Several of my former teammates are joining me there." There was a long pause. "I see. Can I ask what it would take to change your mind?" "Nothing," I said. "This isn't about money or position. It's about working with people who value competence over politics." After I hung up, I drove past Morrison Financial Services one last time. Bradley's BMW was no longer in the executive parking section. Through the lobby windows, I could see the sales floor mostly empty, with only a few remaining team members at their desks. Maria had officially resigned that morning, accepting a senior position at Brightmarsh along with Jessica, Nathan, and David. The core team that had built Morrison's success was gone, taking their client relationships and institutional knowledge with them. Victoria Hayes would need months to rebuild what Bradley had destroyed in his insecurity and fraud. 6 months later, I was reviewing quarterly reports in my new office at Brightmarsh Consulting when Maria knocked on my door. "You need to see this," she said, holding up a local business journal. The headline read, "Morrison Financial Services under federal investigation for management fraud." The article detailed the ongoing criminal case against Bradley Fletcher, who had been charged with wire fraud and falsifying business records. His systematic theft of credit from subordinates had violated federal regulations governing financial services reporting. "It gets better," Maria said, flipping to the second page. "They're facing a class action lawsuit from former employees. Apparently, Bradley's performance fraud affected bonus calculations and promotion decisions for over 3 dozen people. The investigation had expanded beyond our department. Bradley's pattern of taking credit for subordinates' work had infected multiple areas of the company. Victoria Hayes had resigned in disgrace when it became clear the fraud had been happening under her watch for years." "What about Bradley personally?" I asked. House went into foreclosure last month. Wife filed for divorce when the criminal charges were announced. From what I hear, he's unemployable in financial services. Nobody wants to hire someone with federal fraud charges pending. Bradley Fletcher had destroyed his career, his family, and his reputation because he couldn't accept that other people might be better at the job than he was. His insecurity had cost him everything he'd worked to build, while the team members he'd tried to suppress were thriving in environments that valued their contributions. I signed the partnership agreement for our latest client, a major corporation that had followed us from Morrison Financial, and smiled. Sometimes the best revenge is simply allowing incompetent people to destroy themselves while you build something better. The greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's discovering you don't need them to succeed.